The handcuffs clicked shut around Marcus Thompson's wrists as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. For 3 years, he had fooled everyone, his girlfriend, his co-workers, even veterans at the local bar who bought him drinks and thanked him for his service. The Navy SEAL uniform hanging in his closet had never seen saltwater or combat, but it had given him respect, admiration, and identity he desperately craved. As the federal agents led him toward the courthouse steps, Marcus thought his story was over. He was just another fraud, another stolen valor case that would make headlines for a week before disappearing into court records. But what he didn't know was that in the crowd of onlookers, a retired two-star general was watching with intense interest. General Patricia Hayes had seen thousands of soldiers in her 30-year career. She had an eye for spotting the real warriors from the pretenders. But something about Marcus Thompson troubled her, not because he was fake, but because she recognized something authentic buried beneath all the lies. 3 words whispered in her ear by an aide would change everything. Check his records. What they would discover would transform a simple case of stolen valor into something far more complex. A story about a man who had been living someone else's heroism while his own remained buried in classified files that even he had forgotten existed. Marcus Thompson stood in front of his bathroom mirror, carefully adjusting the Navy SEAL trident pin on his dress uniform. The gold emblem caught the morning light, casting tiny reflections across the mirror surface. He had practiced this routine hundreds of times over the past 3 years, but today felt different. Today, he would be speaking at Jefferson Elementary School's Veterans Day assembly, and the weight of his deception felt heavier than usual. The uniform fit perfectly because Marcus had spent months researching every detail. He knew the proper placement of ribbons, the correct way to wear the beret, even the subtle differences between genuine and replica insignia. What he wore was authentic military gear, purchased through various online suppliers and military surplus stores. Only one thing was fake: his right to wear it. Marcus had never served a single day in the military. He was 34 years old, worked as a warehouse supervisor at a logistics company, and lived alone in a modest apartment in suburban Ohio. His military knowledge came from countless hours watching documentaries, reading military websites, and studying the stories of real SEALs until he could recite their experiences as if they were his own. The transformation had begun innocently enough. 3 years earlier, Marcus was having drinks at Murphy's Pub when a group of veterans invited him to join their table. Feeling lonely and wanting to fit in, he mentioned that he had done some time overseas. The veterans assumed he meant military service, and Marcus didn't correct them. One lie led to another, and before he knew it, he was claiming to be a Navy SEAL who had served multiple tours in Afghanistan. The respect was immediate and intoxicating. Strangers bought him drinks, thanked him for his service, and listened with rapt attention to his fabricated stories of combat missions. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt important, valued, and admired. The shy, overlooked warehouse worker disappeared, replaced by Marcus Thompson, American hero. Sarah Mitchell had fallen in love with that hero. They met at a charity fundraiser for wounded warriors, where Marcus was the guest speaker. She was a nurse at the local hospital, kind-hearted and genuinely moved by what she believed was his service and sacrifice. Their relationship blossomed quickly, built on her admiration for his supposed courage and his desperate need for acceptance. "I'm so proud of you," Sarah would often tell him, running her fingers along the scars on his arms. Scars that actually came from a childhood accident with farm equipment, but which Marcus had reimagined as combat wounds. "You've been through so much, but you're still so strong." Those words should have filled Marcus with joy, but instead, they twisted his stomach with guilt. Every loving touch, every proud smile, every moment of genuine affection felt like another brick in the wall of lies he had built around himself. But he was in too deep to stop now. The truth would destroy everything: his relationship, his reputation, his newfound sense of purpose. Marcus had become a fixture in the local veteran community. He volunteered at the VA hospital, participated in Memorial Day parades, and spoke at schools and civic organizations about his service. His stories were compelling because he had carefully crafted them from the real experiences of actual SEALs, combining details from multiple accounts to create a believable narrative of his own heroism. He told audiences about night raids in Kandahar, about saving wounded teammates under enemy fire, about the brotherhood forged in combat zones. His voice would catch with emotion at just the right moments, and his eyes would take on a distant look that audiences interpreted as the thousand-yard stare of a combat veteran processing traumatic memories. The local newspaper had featured him in a Memorial Day article titled, "Local Hero Continues to Serve." The reporter had been impressed by Marcus's humility, the way he deflected praise, and insisted that the real heroes were those who didn't make it home. The article included a photo of Marcus in his dress uniform, standing next to a memorial wall bearing the names of fallen service members. But Marcus's carefully constructed world began to crumble when he encountered someone who actually knew the stories he was telling. Chief Petty Officer James Rodriguez, a genuine Navy SEAL on leave, attended one of Marcus's speaking engagements at the local Rotary Club. As Marcus recounted a mission in Helmand Province, Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly skeptical. After the presentation, Rodriguez approached Marcus with a friendly smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Great talk," he said, shaking Marcus's hand with a grip that lingered just a moment too long. "That story about the compound raid sounded familiar. Almost exactly like something that happened to my team in 2014. Funny thing is, I don't remember you being there." The blood drained from Marcus's face, but he managed to maintain his composure. "There were a lot of joint operations back then," he replied carefully. "Easy for details to get mixed up after all these years." Rodriguez nodded slowly, but Marcus could see the suspicion in his eyes. "Yeah, I suppose they could," he said. "What unit did you say you were with again?" That night, Marcus barely slept. He knew Rodriguez would investigate, and he knew his lies wouldn't withstand scrutiny from someone who actually lived that life. The SEAL community was tight-knit, and records were kept of every operator who served. It was only a matter of time before his deception was exposed. The end came faster than Marcus expected. Rodriguez reached out to his contacts within the SEAL community, and within 48 hours, they had confirmed what he suspected. There was no record of Marcus Thompson ever completing BUD/S training or serving with any SEAL team. Rodriguez reported his findings to the local FBI office, as stolen valor cases had become a federal priority. The investigation moved quickly. Federal agents reviewed Marcus's employment records, bank statements, and social media accounts. They interviewed his girlfriend, co-workers, and the veterans who had befriended him. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus Thompson was a complete fraud. Agent Lisa Chun led the investigation and was struck by the thoroughness of Marcus's deception. "Most stolen valor cases are pretty obvious," she later explained to her supervisor. "Guys who claim impossible accomplishments or wear uniforms covered in medals they couldn't possibly have earned." But Thompson was different. He was careful, methodical. He really studied his role. The arrest came on a Tuesday morning as Marcus was leaving his apartment for work. The media had been tipped off, and cameras captured every moment as he was handcuffed and led to the waiting FBI vehicle. The scene played on local news stations throughout the day, with anchors expressing outrage at his betrayal of public trust. Sarah learned about his arrest from a news report. She sat in her hospital break room, watching the man she loved being led away in handcuffs, while a reporter detailed his deception. The reporter mentioned that Thompson had never served in the military and had fabricated his entire service record. Sarah's coffee grew cold in her hands as the reality of their relationship crumbled around her. The charges were serious. Under the Stolen Valor Act, Marcus faced up to 6 months in prison and substantial fines for falsely claiming military decorations and honors. But the legal consequences were only part of his punishment. The social media reaction was swift and brutal. His photo was shared thousands of times with captions calling him a fraud, a disgrace, and worse. Veterans who had considered him a friend felt personally betrayed. The elementary school where he had spoken just days before sent a letter to parents explaining the situation and apologizing for exposing their children to a fraud. The newspaper that had featured him published a front-page retraction and editorial about the importance of verifying military claims. Marcus's employer placed him on indefinite suspension pending the outcome of his case. His landlord, a Marine veteran, gave him 30 days' notice to vacate his apartment. Even strangers on the street recognized him from the news coverage and weren't shy about expressing their disgust. In his jail cell awaiting bail, Marcus finally confronted the magnitude of what he had done. He hadn't just lied about military service. He had stolen the honor and sacrifice of real heroes. He had accepted gratitude meant for men and women who had actually bled for their country. He had betrayed everyone who had trusted him, loved him, and believed in him. But perhaps most painful of all, he had betrayed himself. Somewhere along the way, the shy warehouse worker had disappeared entirely, replaced by a fiction that even Marcus had started to believe. He no longer knew who he really was beneath all the lies. As he sat on a narrow cot in his cell, Marcus wondered if there was any way back for what he had done. Could he ever rebuild a life based on truth instead of elaborate deception? Could anyone ever trust him again? Could he learn to live with himself as Marcus Thompson, ordinary citizen, instead of Marcus Thompson, American hero? The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week, and Marcus's court-appointed attorney had already advised him to prepare for the likelihood of prison time. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and public sentiment demanded justice. His story, it seemed, was headed for an ignominious ending, another cautionary tale about the consequences of stolen valor. But what Marcus didn't know, as he stared at the ceiling of his cell that night, was that his story was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a turn that no one, including Marcus himself, could have possibly expected. Retired General Patricia Hayes was sipping her morning coffee and reading the newspaper when she saw the photograph that stopped her cold. There, on the front page of the Columbus Dispatch, was Marcus Thompson being led away in handcuffs under the headline, "Local Man Arrested for Military Impersonation." But it wasn't the headline that caught her attention. It was something about the man's face that triggered a memory buried deep in her mind. General Hayes had retired from the Army 2 years earlier after a distinguished 30-year career that included tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and various classified operations around the globe. She had commanded thousands of soldiers and possessed an almost supernatural ability to remember faces, especially those of soldiers who had served under extraordinary circumstances. Something about Marcus Thompson's features nagged at her, like a word on the tip of her tongue that refused to surface. She studied the photograph more closely, ignoring the article's details about his deception and focusing instead on his bone structure, the shape of his eyes, the way he carried himself even in handcuffs. There was something familiar there, something that suggested she had seen this man before, but in a completely different context. That afternoon, General Hayes drove to her home office and began what would become an obsessive investigation. Her office walls were lined with commendations, photographs from various deployments, and maps of global operations she had overseen. In one corner sat a secure filing cabinet containing documents from classified missions, many of which would remain sealed for decades. She started with publicly available information about Marcus Thompson. His arrest record showed he was 34 years old, born in rural Kentucky, and had worked various blue-collar jobs throughout his adult life. There was no record of military service, no record of security clearance applications, nothing that would explain why his face seemed familiar to a retired general who had never served in Ohio. But General Hayes had learned long ago that official records didn't always tell the complete story. During her career, she had been involved in numerous classified operations where soldiers' identities were compartmentalized, where records were deliberately obscured, and where the left hand of the military didn't always know what the right hand was doing. She began making phone calls to former colleagues, carefully probing without revealing her suspicions. Colonel Michael Foster, who had served as her intelligence officer in Afghanistan, agreed to meet her for lunch at a quiet restaurant outside the city. I need you to run a name through some of the older classified databases, she told Foster over grilled salmon and white wine. Marcus Thompson, born 1989, Kentucky. I know it's a long shot, but something about this guy bothers me. Foster raised an eyebrow. This about that stolen valor case in the news? Pat, the guy's a fraud. Why waste time on him? Humor me, General Hayes replied. I've got a feeling about this one. Foster agreed to make some discreet inquiries, and 3 days later, he called with surprising news. Pat, you're not going to believe this. There is a Marcus Thompson in the system, but his file is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. I tried 3 different databases, and they all came back with the same message. Access denied. Need to know basis only. General Hayes felt her pulse quicken. In 30 years of military service, she had rarely encountered files that were completely inaccessible to someone of her former rank and clearance level. Such restrictions were typically reserved for the most sensitive operations, deep cover missions, classified research projects, or operations that had gone badly wrong. Can you at least tell me what agency flagged the file? She asked. That's the weird part, Foster replied. It's not flagged by any current agency. The restriction codes date back to 2007, and they reference something called Operation Nightfall. Ring any bells? Operation Nightfall. The name hit General Hayes like a physical blow, bringing back memories she had tried to suppress for over 15 years. She remembered hot Afghan nights, desperate radio calls, and a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. She remembered a young soldier who had volunteered for an impossible task and had paid a terrible price for his courage. That evening, General Hayes drove to the National Security Archive in College Park, Maryland. As a retired general with maintained security clearance, she had access to certain historical documents that might provide clues about Operation Nightfall. The archive was quiet in the evening hours, staffed only by a skeleton crew of researchers and security personnel. She spent hours scrolling through digitized files from 2007, looking for any reference to the operation. Most of the relevant documents were still classified, but she found oblique references in after-action reports and congressional briefings. Operation Nightfall had been a joint Army Special Operations mission in Afghanistan's Helmand province, designed to infiltrate a Taliban command structure that was coordinating attacks against NATO forces. The operation had required a soldier to assume a deep cover identity, infiltrating Afghan tribal networks over a period of several months. It was incredibly dangerous work that required someone who could blend into the local population and maintain their cover under extreme pressure. The files indicated that the operation had been compromised, resulting in casualties and the extraction of the embedded operative. But the crucial details remained classified. Who was the operative? What happened during the extraction? Why was the mission considered such a sensitive failure that files remained locked 15 years later? General Hayes realized she needed to approach this differently. She began reaching out to former Special Operations colleagues who might have been involved in Afghan operations during that time frame. Most were reluctant to discuss classified missions, even with a former general, but she persisted. Finally, she contacted Brigadier General Robert Kane, who had commanded special operations in the region during 2007. Kane was now retired and living in Colorado, but he agreed to speak with her privately about her inquiries. Pat, why are you digging into Nightfall? Kane asked during their secure phone call. That operation has been buried for good reason. I think one of the operatives from that mission is sitting in a county jail in Ohio, charged with stolen valor, she replied. Marcus Thompson. Does that name mean anything to you? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Kane spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. Jesus Christ, Pachi. Are you sure it's him? I'm not sure of anything yet. That's why I need your help. Kane sighed deeply. Thompson was our deep cover operative on Nightfall. Kid was barely 20 years old, but he had the language skills and the cultural knowledge we needed. His grandmother was Afghan, fled the country in the 1980s, and married an American serviceman. Thompson grew up speaking Pashto and understanding the culture in ways that our other operatives couldn't match. General Hayes felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. What happened to him? The mission went sideways, Kane explained. Thompson had been embedded with a Taliban cell for 4 months, feeding us intelligence about their operations. But someone suspected he was a spy, and his cover was blown. We had to extract him under fire, and during the firefight, he took a head injury that left him with severe memory loss. The implications were staggering. Marcus Thompson, the man now facing charges for pretending to be a military hero, had actually been one of the most courageous soldiers of his generation. He had risked his life in deep cover for months, providing intelligence that had saved countless American and Allied lives. What kind of memory loss? General Hayes asked. Complete retrograde amnesia for the entire period of his service, Kane replied. The doctor said the trauma essentially wiped out 2 years of his life, including his training, his deployment, and the mission itself. He couldn't remember being in the Army at all. What happened to him after that? The Army gave him a medical discharge with full benefits, but because the operation was classified, his service record was sealed. Officially, he was listed as having served in a support role in Germany. The real record of his heroism was buried in files that he couldn't access even if he remembered serving. General Hayes was speechless. Marcus Thompson had been living as a fraud, desperately seeking the respect and recognition that was rightfully his, but which he couldn't remember earning. His stolen valor was actually his own valor, stolen from him by trauma and government secrecy. Bob, this man is sitting in jail right now, she said urgently. The whole country thinks he's a disgrace, but he's actually a hero who can't remember being one. I know, Kane replied sadly. I've been following the case in the news. It's been eating me up inside, but I couldn't say anything without violating security protocols. The operation is still classified. Then, we need to declassify it, General Hayes declared. This man deserves to know who he really is. It's not that simple, Pat. There are procedures, committees, reviews. It could take years. He doesn't have years. He's going to prison unless we act fast. General Hayes spent the next 48 hours making phone calls to every contact she had in Washington. She reached out to former colleagues at the Pentagon, congressional staff members she had worked with on military appropriations, and journalists who had covered national security issues during her career. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Daniel Rodriguez, a former Navy SEAL turned investigative journalist, had been following the Marcus Thompson case for a story about stolen valor. When General Hayes contacted him with her suspicions, he agreed to help investigate. I've been researching this guy for weeks, Rodriguez told her during their phone conversation. Something about his case bothered me from the beginning. His deception was too sophisticated, too detailed. Most stolen valor cases are obvious frauds, but Thompson knew things that only someone with real military knowledge would understand. Rodriguez had contacts throughout the intelligence community who could access databases that were closed to military personnel. Within 24 hours, he confirmed what General Hayes suspected. Marcus Thompson had indeed served under Operation Nightfall, and his service record had been classified at the highest levels. This is incredible, Rodriguez said. According to my sources, Thompson's actions during that mission saved the lives of an entire Special Forces team that was pinned down by enemy fire. He provided coordinates for air support while maintaining his cover, even though it put him at extreme risk. The journalist agreed to write a story about Thompson's real service, but they both knew that without official declassification of the operation, it would be difficult to prove their claims. Government sources would neither confirm nor deny the existence of classified operations, and Thompson himself had no memory of his service. That's when General Hayes decided to take the most significant risk of her career. She would use her influence and reputation to force the government's hand, even if it meant facing charges for revealing classified information. She called a press conference for the following Friday, just 3 days before Marcus Thompson's sentencing hearing. The location was the Press Club in Washington, D.C., and she invited every major news organization in the country. The subject, miscarriage of justice in military impersonation case. The night before the press conference, General Hayes sat in her hotel room, reviewing the prepared statement that would either vindicate Marcus Thompson or end her own career in disgrace. She thought about the young soldier she had never met, but whose sacrifice had been erased by classification protocols and bureaucratic caution. She thought about the real heroes whose stories would never be told because their missions remained classified. She thought about a man sitting in a jail cell, branded as a fraud when he was actually one of the bravest soldiers she had ever heard of. General Hayes had built her career on following orders and respecting the chain of command. But sometimes she realized the most important duty was to the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Tomorrow, she would tell Marcus Thompson's story to the world, and let the consequences fall where they may. The press conference room at the National Press Club was packed beyond capacity. Reporters from CNN, Fox News, The Washington Post, and dozens of other outlets filled every seat, while camera crews lined the walls. General Patricia Hayes had commanded attention from world leaders and enemy combatants, but never had she felt the weight of scrutiny quite like this. She approached the podium wearing her dress uniform, the ribbons and medals accumulated over 30 years of service catching the harsh television lights. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the gravity of what she was about to reveal. "I am here today to discuss a grave injustice that is about to be perpetrated against a true American hero, a man who is currently sitting in a jail cell branded as a fraud when he is actually one of the bravest soldiers I have ever encountered." She paused, knowing that her next words would change everything for Marcus Thompson and potentially end her own career. "The man you know as Marcus Thompson, who stands accused of stolen valor, is actually a decorated veteran of a classified special operations mission that saved American lives in Afghanistan. His heroism has been erased not by deception, but by government secrecy and a traumatic brain injury that robbed him of his memories." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, photographers' flashes created a strobe effect, and camera operators jostled for better angles. General Hayes waited for the chaos to subside before continuing. In 2007, then, Private Thompson volunteered for Operation Nightfall, a classified mission that required him to infiltrate Taliban networks in Afghanistan's Helmand province. For 4 months, he lived among enemy combatants, feeding crucial intelligence to American forces while risking his life every single day. She detailed what she could about the operation without compromising national security, describing Thompson's courage, his linguistic abilities, and the intelligence he provided that prevented attacks on American bases. The room was absolutely silent now, every reporter hanging on her words. When his cover was compromised, Private Thompson fought his way out alongside a Special Forces extraction team. During that firefight, he suffered a traumatic brain injury that erased his memory of his military service entirely. The government gave him a medical discharge with full benefits, but because the operation was classified, his heroic service was buried in files that even he could not access. General Hayes looked directly into the cameras as she delivered her conclusion. Marcus Thompson has been searching for purpose and recognition, not knowing that he had already earned both through extraordinary service to his country. The valor he has been accused of stealing is his own valor, stolen from him by circumstances beyond his control. The questions came rapid fire. How could she prove these claims? Why was she revealing classified information? What did she expect to happen to Thompson now? General Hayes answered what she could, but she knew the real impact of her revelation would unfold in the days to come. Within hours of the press conference, the story had exploded across social media. The hashtag Justice for Thompson began trending as the public grappled with the stunning reversal of everything they thought they knew about the case. Veterans groups that had condemned Thompson just days earlier were now calling for investigations into how his case had been handled. But the most significant reaction came from the Department of Defense itself. Less than 12 hours after General Hayes' revelation, Pentagon officials announced that they were reviewing the classification status of Operation Nightfall and Thompson's service record. Secretary of Defense James Mitchell faced intense pressure during his regular Pentagon briefing. We take any allegations about the mishandling of veteran records extremely seriously, he said. If General Hayes's claims are accurate, then we have a responsibility to correct this injustice immediately. In his jail cell, Marcus Thompson watched the news coverage with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The woman on television was describing heroic actions that he couldn't remember performing, missions that felt like scenes from someone else's life. But as she spoke, he experienced strange flashes of memory. The smell of diesel fuel and dust, the sound of voices speaking Pashto, the weight of fear that comes with living a lie among dangerous people. His court-appointed attorney, David Chun, arrived at the jail that evening with news that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. Marcus, we need to talk. The federal prosecutor has agreed to suspend all charges pending a government review of your service record. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice hoarse from hours of watching news coverage. How can I have served if I don't remember any of it? Chun had been asking himself the same question as he reviewed the documents that had mysteriously appeared on his desk that afternoon. According to these preliminary files, you suffered what's called retrograde amnesia. The trauma essentially erased specific memories while leaving other cognitive functions intact. The documents revealed a service record that read like something from a spy novel. Thompson had been recruited for special operations while still in basic training due to his unique linguistic abilities and cultural background. He had undergone months of specialized training before deploying to Afghanistan under deep cover. Dr. Sarah Walsh, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins who specialized in military trauma cases, agreed to examine Thompson at the request of the Pentagon. Her evaluation confirmed what the medical records suggested. Thompson showed clear signs of having suffered a severe traumatic brain injury consistent with a mechanism described in his classified files. The brain is remarkably complex in how it processes and stores memories, Dr. Walsh explained to reporters outside the jail. It's entirely possible for someone to lose specific episodic memories while retaining the skills and knowledge they acquired during that period. Mr. Thompson may not remember his service, but the person he became as a result of that service remains intact. Meanwhile, the investigation into Thompson's true service record was moving with unprecedented speed. Congressional leaders from both parties demanded answers about how a decorated veteran could end up charged with stolen valor. The case had become a symbol of broader concerns about how the government treated veterans and managed classified operations. General Hayes found herself at the center of a media firestorm, but she had no regrets about her decision to speak out. She testified before a closed-session congressional committee about Operation Nightfall and Thompson's role in the mission. Gradually, more details emerged about the operation's success and the lives that had been saved due to Thompson's intelligence gathering. The breakthrough in Thompson's case came from an unexpected source. James Rodriguez, the Navy SEAL who had originally exposed Thompson as a fraud, reached out to General Hayes after learning the truth about the situation. I feel terrible about what I started, Rodriguez told her during a phone call. I was so focused on protecting the integrity of military service that I didn't consider there might be more to the story. Rodriguez used his connections in the special operations community to gather testimonials from soldiers who had been saved by intelligence provided during Operation Nightfall. Their statements painted a picture of Thompson as a hero whose actions had prevented numerous attacks on American forces. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Davis had been part of the extraction team that pulled Thompson out of Afghanistan. "That kid saved my entire team," Davis told reporters. "We were pinned down by enemy fire when Thompson called in our position for air support. He could have run, could have tried to save himself, but he stayed to help us." That's the definition of heroism. As the evidence mounted, public opinion underwent a dramatic shift. Social media posts that had previously condemned Thompson now praised his service and criticized the system that had failed him. Veterans who had felt betrayed by his deception now felt betrayed by the government's handling of his case. Sarah Mitchell, Thompson's former girlfriend, struggled with the revelation that the man she had loved and lost was actually the hero she had believed him to be. In an interview with a local television station, she spoke about the complex emotions she was experiencing. Part of me is angry that he lied to me, she said, tears streaming down her face. But now I understand why he was searching for something he couldn't name. He was looking for himself, for the person he used to be, but couldn't remember. The legal resolution came swiftly once the Pentagon completed its review. All charges against Thompson were dropped, and the Department of Defense issued a formal apology for the administrative error that had led to his prosecution. Secretary Mitchell announced that Thompson would receive full recognition for his service, including the medals he had earned during Operation Nightfall. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Thompson was reunited with members of his old unit during a ceremony at the Pentagon. As he shook hands with soldiers whose lives he had saved, flashes of memory began to return. Not complete recollections, but emotional impressions of brotherhood, duty, and shared sacrifice. I may not remember everything I did, Thompson said during his first public statement after the charges were dropped, but I'm beginning to remember who I was. More importantly, I'm learning who I want to be going forward. Thompson's case sparked nationwide reforms in how the military handles classified service records and traumatic brain injuries. New protocols were established to ensure that veterans' heroic service couldn't be buried so completely that even they forgot their own contributions. General Hayes retired quietly from public life, satisfied that justice had been served. She had risked her reputation and career to defend a soldier she had never met. But she knew that sometimes the most important battles were fought not on foreign soil, but in defense of truth and honor at home. Marcus Thompson began working with veterans organizations to help other soldiers who struggled with the transition from military to civilian life. His unique perspective, as someone who had experienced both the respect accorded to heroes and the shame of being branded a fraud, gave him special insight into the challenges veterans faced. He never fully recovered his memories of his military service, but he no longer needed to. The person he was today had been shaped by experiences he couldn't remember, and that was enough. He had learned that heroism wasn't about the recognition or the stories people told about you. It was about the willingness to serve something greater than yourself, even if no one ever knew about it. 6 months after his charges were dropped, Thompson received a phone call from Sarah Mitchell. She had been following his story in the news and wanted to see him again, not as the fabricated hero she had fallen in love with, but as the real man he was learning to become. I don't know if we can rebuild what we had, she told him over coffee at a small cafe in Columbus. But I'd like to try to build something new, something based on truth this time. As they talked, Thompson realized that his long journey through deception and back to authenticity had taught him something valuable. The respect and admiration he had craved weren't things that could be stolen or faked. They had to be earned through genuine actions and honest relationships. He would spend the rest of his life proving himself worthy of the honor he had earned but forgotten, not through elaborate stories or stolen glory, but through the simple act of living with integrity. In the end, that was the greatest tribute he could pay to the young soldier he had once been and the man he was still becoming. The case of Marcus Thompson became a cautionary tale about the complexity of truth, the hidden costs of classified operations, and the importance of ensuring that heroes are never forgotten, even by themselves. It reminded the nation that sometimes the most important battles are fought not just on foreign shores, but in the struggle to remember who we are and what we stand for. And it proved that sometimes, even when everything seems lost, a single voice speaking the truth can change everything.